Awesome. All right. Look, let's make a start. So, look, welcome everyone to today's webinar, our Cloud Insights webinar. Today's webinar is actually sponsored by our partner Veeam, and we've got Ian from Veeam, which I'll introduce shortly. If you've been following this series, this is the second in the series for our Cloud Insights. Certainly connect with Secure Agility on LinkedIn to keep across this process. But we're doing these webinars monthly at the moment, working with different vendors and really exploring the different attributes around cloud and topics around cloud as well. So thanks again for joining us. We will share the recordings at the end of this and provide opportunity for feedback as well through surveys and bits and pieces. Look, in terms of the, I guess, journey of why we're doing these webinars, we're really focused on customers that are in the optimized phase of their cloud journey. So they've transitioned, moved into management, and now are looking to optimize those certain components. So that can be things like cost, that can be things like security, recoverability, resiliency, those sorts of things as well. So our topics are really centered around that, and it's a part of a broader conversation we have with our customers about their cloud journeys. So it's fantastic to bring these topics to the forefront as well. So today's webinar is about half an hour. And we'll kick into the topic for today. So our topic today was which cloud backup option is right for me? Now, why do we see this as an important topic? One of the questions we get asked all of the time from our customers is about backup resiliency, protecting yourselves from cybersecurity threats and things like crypto locking and those sorts of things as well. But ultimately too, looking at how to get the maximum return out of your investment. Now, I thought it's probably worthwhile introducing myself as well in this process. So I'm Soren Reichelt, a principal consultant here at Secure Agility and hosting most of the Cloud Insight series. But I'm joined today by Ian, a solution architect from Veeam. Ian, how are you today, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. How are you?
Very well, very well. And you had a birthday last week. Happy birthday.
I did. Thank you. Lockdown birthday, my second one running. But
that's right. Oh, to be 20 again, mate. To be 20 again. So I guess, look, mate, for those who don't know who or what Veeam is, it'd be great to get a bit of background, I guess, in your journey with Veeam and maybe a bit of a conversation about Veeam as a business as well and what it is you guys do.
Yeah, sure. So Veeam started up in 2006 because they saw a little bit of a gap in the market because there was this new technology that appeared called VMware that not a lot of people were using at the time. That all the traditional backup vendors were backing up in a non-optimal way. So Veeam sort of came and revolutionized that sort of industry by backing up in a VMware in a VMware-centric manner. And then all the other backup vendors sort of copied that innovative approach, and we've been innovating ever since. We're actually one of the main leaders in the Gartner Magic Quadrant now, and we've grown astronomically over that time. But yeah, it's a great company to work for, and everything's that pace of innovation has just accelerated over time.
Yeah, and I guess it's been, we were talking about this, preparing for this webinar. In my IT journey, I've known Veeam for the majority of my career as a strong backup solution. And as the industry's changed and clouds change and Office 365 and all of these new technologies have come out, Veeam's obviously been at the forefront of a lot of those things as well. So, and on a personal note, just for the audience or anyone watching, I mean, how did you end up in the technology industry, Ian?
Yeah, interesting story. So when I was at university, I was doing a maths degree with basically no idea what I wanted to do as a career, and I needed to earn a bit of money whilst I was at university, and I got myself a job in an IT department building an access database of all things, and from there it just snowballed. I was offered jobs for some of the major computer companies and stuff like that, and then the rest is history.
I think I like asking people that question because a lot of people have the same answer. I fell into IT through these sorts of things. Yeah, that's why it's the same thing, right? And you start to grow and you find your passion and area and focus. And at the moment, as a solution architect for Veeam, I mean, what's really the core function that you do for Veeam at the moment?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for a while. So I basically speak to customers, trying to understand what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve, and then I advise them on the best approaches to actually do what they need to do. But it's mostly around managing risk, and that risk comes in many forms, be that IT business risk, but also risk of cost and things like that as well. So there's lots of that sort of discussion.
And it's a really topical discussion at the moment when we look at some of the cyber risks that's out there, and building resiliency and recoverability in systems has never been more important.
Oh, yeah.
In these days. I mean, it's always been important, but now it's just the risk landscape so much greater. So I imagine you get exposed to many different situations and bits and pieces in that process. So before we talk about, I guess, backup, in its entirety, and some of the things with cloud backup as well, I wanted to sort of, I guess, focus around this topic of why organizations are adopting cloud so rapidly. I mean, in my career, I sort of started pre-cloud, the term, but watched it sort of grow and expand. And I guess we have a pre-pandemic view of cloud and then a post-pandemic view of cloud. I mean, and maybe we're post, maybe we're not. But from your perspective, I mean, why do you feel organisations were adopting cloud pre or post COVID?
Yeah, so originally it was basically all around innovation. So people, companies want to innovate, and the competition is great in any sector at the moment. So IT is actually a really great way of differentiating yourself from the competition. But being able to get your IT department to innovate, but whilst they're trying to spending all their time keeping the lights on, is something that's quite difficult to achieve. So the cloud is something that offers them to get rid of the keep the lights on thing and then allow them to focus on innovating. But coming back to what you were saying pre and post, so post pandemic, that sort of leads to the question of if we're in lockdown and we're not allowed to actually even enter a data center because the data center is restricting access, how do you change a disk? How do you change a tape, or without having physical access to that environment? And it presents a whole nother series of challenges and actually huge risks to the business. So we've seen a massive growth in people adopting cloud in many different forms for many different reasons through COVID.
Yeah, and it is interesting to your point before about the innovation side and accessing and unlocking that innovation. Just even things like video. I was thinking the other day just how much I use Teams now than I did before. Most people would agree with that now, but it just seems so natural. But for some organizations to get access to that technology, cloud had to be that transition they needed to do, which is quite interesting as well. And that's been really, a rapid process of change in a lot of businesses. And I wanted to center around this a little bit because stat slides are always fun, but the reality of it is that I liked this statistic of the Australian IaaS market is actually up by 40%. So that's businesses that are now consuming these infrastructure as a service models from public cloud providers, 2019 to 2020. Which is amazing. That's a huge amount of growth, and very quickly people are moving towards that. The interesting part as well is, you sort of segment the market into public, private, and then hybrid. From a private instance as well, those IaaS providers, which would have been locally hosted infrastructure companies, they've seen a decrease, I guess, from the public cloud providers like your Amazon and your Azures, but they're now becoming a lot more niche. And certainly in these hybrid scenarios as well, people are now looking for how do I optimize across all of these areas. I mean, to your point before, I think through the pandemic, we've seen that growth. It's always been on that trajectory, but it's now been very exponential. And, as a part of this series, what we've really been, I guess, talking on as well is, how does this impact budgets? Moving from this model of owning an asset, you were talking about the tape loader before, owning a tape loader and knowing that process of retention through the tapes was, there you go. We make the asset investment and we get the return. Now with cloud and subscription costs, it's consumption. It's like consuming power or water or gas, right? You're now consuming this compute, storage, and all of these different components, which I think, for me, when I'm talking to customers, presents quite an interesting challenge for businesses. I mean, do you sort of see this? I mean, we talk about the return on investment calculators and bits and pieces that you work with, but do you sort of see this as a big challenge with customers, Ian, that you're, the rising subscription costs and how that fits into backup?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, without a doubt, it's a bit of a learning experience for people as they go into this. Well, I say new world, but it's not really so new for a lot of people. But everyone's just as they build out an environment, it's sort of a trial and error approach that people approach. They make a decision based off the information they have today,
Yeah.
and then as they get the bills through from the cloud vendor, they adapt and change their approach and things. So
A bit similar to running the air conditioning at home at summer, right? Until you get the bill, it's all fun, and then once you start seeing the bill, you need to start addressing that. Which organisations are seeing. The interesting part is that when we look at those consumable items, it's not just one item. It's storage, it's compute, it's software, it's all of these different components. So I'm certainly looking forward in this series to exploring some of those other areas as well. But I guess when we look at today's topic, it's really about, how do most organizations back up in the cloud, and how can we get the right fit for backup solutions using the right technologies and the different cloud options that exist? That question to you, looking at organizations that have already migrated to the cloud, what's the traditional sort of process they go through, and how do they typically back up, like an Azure environment as an example?
Yeah, so they would typically go into the cloud and have a view of going into the cloud provider would actually provide that facility. That would typically be snapshots, or in terms of Azure, they have a backup product called Azure Backup to be able to manage that environment. So that's typically how things are done, because most people actually go into a situation where going into cloud, which they think everything needs to be cloud native, and it does. That is a very valid approach, but it doesn't. Cloud native doesn't mean it needs to be provided by the cloud vendor themselves. And there's reasons behind that we'll go into as we move forward.
And that, I guess, when we look at moving from that most common approach, and this is where a lot of the work that you're doing is, it's not just about, changing the target, if you like, for backups and moving tiering in bits and pieces. It's also about understanding the retention cycles and how that fits into tiering and all of those other components. So there's a whole level of, it's a matrix, you imagine, of just different levels of different components and structures that need to be configured, ultimately to serve the business's requirement, which is the recovery time, recovery point, based on the different components that exist.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's there's a lot of complexity in the cloud. The cloud is amazing in what it offers, but understanding how it works allows you to intelligently put things in the right places at the right time.
Yeah. And I guess, understanding that, and, we were sort of talking about this the other day, that, no two clouds are the same. And, you sort of feel for not even just the industry professionals, but customers that are out there trying to consume, buy and manage all of these different services. When we look at this, and we've sort of used some examples here of the different storage tiers that you might use as targets from AWS or from Azure. Give us a bit of a snapshot there, I guess, of what these all mean, the S3 standard, IA and one zone. How are these organizations delineating value in these different, tiers, and how does that relate back to things like backup, as an example?
Yeah, so let me describe what you're seeing in front of you here a little bit first of all. So with there's different terminologies that each of the clouds use, but they sort of offer very similar in a way things, and it's just understanding what that actually means. So EBS, so Elastic Block Storage, and Azure Managed Disk sort of the same thing. It's storage attached to a virtual machine.
Yeah.
Though the costs involved in that are basically the size of those disks and what performance you get out of them. By performance, I mean you're talking IOPS, you're talking throughputs and things like that. That each of the disk characteristics that they offer have different abilities to achieve that, and then there's a different cost associated with those. So if we go down to the next tier, so we're talking S3 in AWS and blob storage in Azure. That's object storage. So object storage is without going into too much detail, it's a place where you can put a lot of data, infinitely-ish scalable. And that, from a cost perspective, is dealt with in a different way. So it's not from a performance perspective, it's more from how you interact with that data. The different tiers of standard IA, which stands for infrequent access, or hot or cool. So think standard, think hot, think IA, think cool. That is based off how long the data is in there. So if you're storing a certain degree of data for a short amount of time, so less than 30 days, you'd store it in hot or standard, but it would cost you more per gig per month than what it would be going into something like infrequent access or cool. But in those places, you have to keep it there for a minimum of 30 days, but they're accessing that data. So you also get charged on how many times you read it, you access it, you download it, you upload, and things like that. You get charged on all of those things. It's the transactional nature of that platform. That cost is higher, goes up as you go down the tiers, and the cost for actually just storing the data, the size of the data, goes down as you go through those tiers. So it's sort of an inverse relationship. And leading on to the last stage of Glacier and Archive and Glacier Deep Archive, those are really, you don't touch it. You put it there, forget about it for a long time.
So, and this is, I guess, you spend a lot of your time in this world of designing out how different, end of years and long-term storage and how that all sits in these different tiers to drive the right cost investment or cost outcome for the backup. Because I mean, backup is essentially an insurance, the ability to recover in the event, and you want to make sure that you're getting the right level of insurance for the risk. But at the same time as well, not storing everything in blob storage hot just because that was easiest, because you will be spending or overspending in that sense in some backup instances.
Without a doubt. It's understanding how the cloud mechanisms work in comparison to what you need as a business from a risk perspective. So it's finding that right balance.
Yeah, and then down the bottom here, I mean, obviously, what drives a customer's decision or process? I mean, this is the nuts and bolts of this webinar was really about which cloud backup option's right for me. You can't answer that in one word, but in essence, what drives people to the different cloud options will be things like price, incumbency, so how close my data is to that cloud, vendor preference. Some people have a preference based on their partners or their skill set, or even just brand. In terms of who they want to work with, and ultimately as well, the capabilities of those different clouds. The interesting part is managed service providers have been using these types of cloud technologies to deliver managed backup solutions for a long time as well to customers. And for some customers, that's a great outcome because they don't want to have the internal nuances of managing backups. They want the outcome managed for them, which is quite interesting. And certainly in those SMB places, I think that's a good space. So look, we were talking about some examples, I guess, Ian, of different businesses that you've worked with. And one was, obviously we can't name any names because we're talking about very specific information here, but a large entertainment business working across many different sectors of entertainment. And you recently performed a bit of an ROI calculation, looking at, I guess, their environment that transitioning into Azure and what they were doing with Azure Backup at that time. Do you want to talk us through that story? Like,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so they'd moved into Azure, and it's a really great example of what I talked about before on the trial and error approach that people have used with the cloud. They went into Azure for a subset of their workloads, and they were loving the functionality that was offering, and adopted Azure Backup from the beginning. And then over time, they saw their bills coming in, and then the growth over time of the relative percentage of what Azure Backup was actually costing over time was increasing significantly. We got involved and chatted to them about what it was they were doing, and then talked about a bit of a better way of actually protecting the environment, which is implementing Veeam Backup for Azure. And by implementing that, they saw a return in a really, really short amount of time, in just 3 months. And then basically as they go on through the years, that ROI just gets better and better and better.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, and that's back to the point of insurance. If you get an increased level of protection or resiliency options and choice, and that's a return. I mean, that's the promise of technology in so many different ways. Whether it be backup, whether it be any investment you make in technology, it's about that return period and how quickly it can provide that. I think that's a really good example, because I actually see a few customers where we look at their Azure spend, and Azure Backup can be a huge component. Sometimes north of 15%, 20% of the entire Azure spend after enough time. So it's quite interesting. So look, I wanted to talk, I guess, about another example. If we move sort of past Azure, maybe look at AWS. And in our first webinar, Zach sort of spoke about this example. Do you want to talk to us about this insurance company? I mean, 400 EC2 loads is quite a few instances.
Yeah. They're a lot bigger than the previous example we just talked about, but they're actually nowhere near some of the biggest that we're speaking to. I'm speaking to one customer that's 4 times the size of this.
Wow.
But yeah, AWS can actually be really expensive. So because of how the backups work in AWS, which is just by using their snapshotting technology, there is a lot of savings to be had, and as you can see here, it was significant. 75% is not uncommon for AWS environments, because of the snapshot technology in AWS is amazing, it's brilliant, but it's costly, and it's not always relevant, and it's sort of what we were talking to before about that tiering approach and being able to know what the right place to store the information based off what your requirements for that data is super important. And in this case, the savings were just astronomical, and in a really, really short amount of time as well.
Yeah, and what's interesting there is, I mean, it's not. It's always easy retrospectively, I guess, to look back and say, hey, we could have done this, we could have done that. But when you're migrating 400 workloads potentially to AWS, that job in itself, it's just about, you sort of mentioned this last time, was backup can often be the afterthought. It's about getting everything across safely and making sure it all works effectively. And now, okay, we've got an option for backup, but we didn't necessarily price all of those things. So I imagine you get involved maybe a little bit later down the train.
I've got occurrences of I've been involved much before they've even made the cloud decision, and I've been advising them on that. And but often, as you say, people are in a rush to make that migration for a variety of reasons, and some of the things we talked about in the post-pandemic world. Every decision you make as a customer is the right decision, because it's the right decision for you for now. It's just about optimizing over time, and that's what we all do in our lives day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we haven't spoken about things like backing up Office 365 or any of those sort of nuances for software as a service, which I think even in some of the CRM technologies and bits and pieces out there is going to be a whole nother area of backup in the future as well, which is absolutely awesome. But look, that's been fantastic. So I think what I've really, I guess, taken from that, Ian, is it's about making sure that we're understanding back to the fundamentals or the core fundamentals of what you're trying to achieve from your backup and recovery solution. Sometimes that'll move into things like, we had an example the other day, disaster recovery and optimizing disaster recovery costs as a part of the process in the cloud as well, was, going in with your eyes open, making sure that you're designing solutions that are effective, but also, I guess, leaning on, people like Veeam, our engineering team at Secure Agility as well, designing out these solutions for customers. And we certainly encourage anyone who's on the webinar who might be feeling like, look, we would like to review or have a look at our backup costs because it is getting out of control, or maybe we want to improve what we're doing there. Certainly reach out to us at inform@secureagility.com. We'd be happy to engage the team and see what we can do to help and see if we can design a solution there as well. But look, Ian, thank you so much for taking some time to talk us through the backup options and how that all works. It's always a pleasure, mate, to connect. And look, I guess one of the things we wanted to do was just highlight as well that the Veeam On 2021 is happening on the 14th of October. For customers who might be interested in getting a bit more of an understanding of Veeam, what does this mean for them?
Yeah, so Veeam On is our premier event that we do every year, and because it's become so popular, we actually do an update towards the end of the year, which is what this exactly is. It's just a couple of hours. It's in 2 days' time. If you want to get onto it, I'd highly recommend. We're actually announcing a brand new product on it. No spoilers here, otherwise I will get kneecapped by our marketing department. But yeah, it's lots of information about what we're doing and all the innovation that's coming, and there is a lot of it coming out of Veeam at the moment. I highly recommend it.
I'll have to certainly make sure I register as well, which is great. Look, thank you again, mate. Enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you everyone for joining us as well. You can always follow Secure Agility at the LinkedIn address that's on the screen. We will be continuing to do this journey. There's a few more webinars that are coming out. We may also send out a survey at the end of this process. If there's any feedback that you have or any topics that you'd like for us to discuss, we're certainly open to that feedback as well. But Ian, thank you so much again.
Lovely chatting to you as always, Soren.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.